Welcome to the Alternative Leader podcast. My name is Mary Williams and I'm the Mind Architect. I'm also founder of the Alternative Leader Academy and author of It Begins With You. This podcast is dedicated to inspiring the leaders of today to lead with intention, both in their personal and their professional lives. My guests from across the world share their challenges, their knowledge and their experiences so that we can learn from these powerful insights to help us lead with strength, determination and compassion. Hi, my name is Mary Williams and welcome to the Alternative Leader podcast. Today's guest is Esther Stanhope. Esther is author of Goodbye Glossophobia, a book which helps you look at your fear of public speaking. Esther describes herself as a workaholic, whether that's come from being a young child of 6 and looking after 2 younger siblings when her father died, or just the fact that she absolutely adores her work. Esther's been a producer and comes from a broadcasting background. You can find all of the information about Esther at estherstanhope.com, and there's lots of great free resources there too. Esther had a heart attack at aged 45, which is fascinating because we don't tend to think of people having heart attacks at 45, and also didn't present in the way that a heart attack would normally present. So tune in and have a listen to Esther talk about her workaholicness and her heart attack aged 45, and also some amazing tips about her work and how you can stop being afraid of getting up on that stage. So let's meet Esther.
At the moment, I love my work. I love being busy. I've always loved being busy. But maybe that's a great thing, but it can also be a downside, as I found out when I was aged 45 in 2017. So, I mean, the reason I had a heart attack, by the way, I am fine. I take meds now. I've got a stent put in, but a stent normally is for people that are over the age of, 70. Yeah. So I do feel as if it was a wake-up call. So the reason I had a heart attack the main reason is because it runs in the family. My dad died aged 40 in 1977 when I was 5. Yeah. So we were mindful as a family, and I'm one of 6 children. So right. we were mindful that we always had to check. I knew the word blood pressure when I was 6 years old. I knew cholesterol. I remember my mum talking about cholesterol, and we shouldn't have red meat, although I never really, when I was a teenager, I was vegetarian like everyone else, but I had the odd bacon sandwich. So I was like, I'd be like vegetarian on the ridiculous. I've always been active, but I've never been sporty. I've never been huge. I never looked terribly unfit. I could have been fitter, and I do like drinking. So I don't drink too much now, but I do like a drink. I like wine. I like food. I used to smoke. Then I was a social smoker, which meant I didn't smoke like a proper smoker. What does that mean exactly? Just means I didn't smoke 20 a day. I smoked probably 3 or 4. Yeah. Funny talking about smoking, actually, because my kids hated me smoking. So I kind of hid it from them, but you can't hide smoking. No. It stinks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, I gave up smoking when I had my heart attack. So my problem is I love working. I speak at events I was speaking at events all over the world. When I had my heart attack, I was actually, when I first had the feeling of the pressure on the chest, I was actually at the airport. I think I was on my way to Amsterdam for a conference. My background's broadcasting, so I've always worked in an environment which requires high intensity and it requires high drama, creativity, thinking on your feet, live at the BBC, Boris Johnson's walking in, Theresa May's coming in today, we might have George Clooney, quick interview here, jump on the bus, get a taxi, quickly go to the recording studio, edit, live on air. It's very much like boom, boom, boom. And I've always thrived in that environment. Some people would say, I don't just want to sit. A lot of people say, my dream is to win the lottery and sit down with a martini.
I couldn't do that either.
The life? A lot of people, and I think in my head, should I be sitting on a yacht with a martini? Should that be my kind of dream? Say to the kids, right, I'm going to retire early and we're going to sit on a yacht. But actually, I don't want to do that.
I think I just actually want to pause you there, because I think that's a really interesting point, because I think a lot of people think they should want to slow down. That actually maybe I want to work too much. And I remember speaking to, I think it was my brother-in-law years ago, and he was way high in a large global company. And he said he'd had some coaching, and actually what he'd realized was he didn't mind working, 18-hour days, because he loved what he was doing, but he minded the effect on his family. And I thought that was a really interesting, difference, because I do think, actually there are those of us out there, we love what we do. We feel energized by what we do. I know I get energy from my work, and you're almost kind of checking how guilty you feel because you love what you do. And I think it's really fascinating that you say that. Actually, would you be happy sitting on a yacht doing nothing?
I think I can answer that now. No, I really wouldn't be happy sitting on a yacht doing nothing. I love the idea of sitting on a yacht after I've written my next book, or I've done my podcast, or I was there because I was interviewing somebody famous or something. But what is that? I mean, that's something that is a question. Why do I feel as if I need to succeed, or I need to win something, or I need to produce something? It's like I always have to feel productive. So today I'm really, really busy today, right? But I've still got a chicken carcass boiling in a pan to make stock, because for some reason that makes me feel like a good mum.
Oh yes. If you bake something or boil something or make a stew,
and I love the idea that I can put the timer on, so I don't even have to look at it, because I know that it's bubbling away and it's got its own timer on. But I'm making chicken stock ready to make soup later. So it's like, I love efficiency. I like being able to say I've done something today, or I've created something today. So
and do you think, has that always been helpful to you though, feeling like that you always need to be busy and you always need to be doing something?
To be honest with you, until the heart attack and until I had children and I took time off with maternity leave, I never really thought about it. I was always busy, and I worked in production. So if you work in television or radio or any form of production, and if you go from one job to the next, you are so focused on what you're doing. Production actually swallows you up sometimes. Right. I mean, a live show, I used to call it in the BBC when I used to do the breakfast show, I used to call it's a hungry beast, and it's never, ever not hungry. It needs to be fed all the time. It never goes off. It's 24 hours. So you could get a call at 10 o'clock at night saying, oh, Nigella Lawson can't come in tomorrow. And you've got to be in there at 4 a.m, and there you are at 9 o'clock at night, fiddling around, ready for the morning show.
Yeah.
So the thing is, I really did enjoy, I like the frenetic life. I like being busy, but I suppose I also really liked the celebration afterwards, or go to the pub afterwards. And a lot of my life, when I think about it, I really enjoy people. I enjoy chatting. I enjoy having a few drinks. I think what I didn't know earlier on in my life, though, was what I really enjoy is coming up with stuff, coming up with ideas, coming up with, what if that could happen? Or what about this story? Or then we could do this, then we could do that. And I think as a child, you do that all the time, and it's expected of you. I don't think it's valued so much. I'm an ideas person. And I do remember my old boss meeting me for coffee and saying, oh, it was really hard when you left because you were the ideas person. I remember thinking, you never told me that in all the 10 years we worked together. I never even realized I'm an ideas person. And even now I still feel like, have I got the right to say I'm a creative? I'm a creative type. I think it's kind of, a show off. Is that showing off? But I have been an ideas person. I haven't always been the most conventional thinker. And that can be really good and really hard.
Yes,
in the world of business.
Yes, I understand that. I'm the same, and I think it sits you in a really wonderful position in that you're thinking outside of the box. And like you say, I'm an ideas person too, but actually, to people who are not ideas people, it can be jarring sometimes. We kind of walk a fine tightrope in the middle there, really, sometimes.
Yes, and I also know that I'm quite an extreme extrovert whenever I do any personality tests, whether you like them or not. I do find it fascinating. And as a professional speaker who helps people to speak, I do like to know I've delved
Yes.
into the whole personality psychometric testing, but because I like to think, right, it's quite good to know something about yourself and something that you can tangibly write down on a graph is sometimes quite helpful. I know that I am quite an extreme extrovert, and whenever I learn about extroverts, I find it really interesting because I think extroverts quite often need they need something to stimulate them. They need like lots of things happening new. Oh, look over here. Oh, that's new. Oh, something else. Oh, look over there. And sometimes I think, oh, that's terrible. My husband's an extreme introvert. Maybe it's not a personality thing. It could be just a person thing. But he's like, just do one thing at a time. And I'm thinking, I do 10. I do 10 things. Why can't I do 10 things? Whoops, I'm hitting my microphone. Why can't I do 10 things? And I've realized actually, trying to do 10 things isn't a great strategy.
I think it's a really interesting one. I'm definitely a try and do 10 things at once, but have learned not to. Because I found, I was kind of nudging lots of things forward, but actually in the end, what I realized about myself was, although I have that propensity to want to do the 10 things, I'm actually better at just focusing on one or up to 3. And then I'm like, I'm doing this and do this and do this. And I realized, I think it was an interesting thing in the last few years, I realized I don't transition well. And that came from starting my own business, obviously, a few years ago, and realizing that when clients booked in and I kind of had these hour gaps between them, that I got almost nothing done in that hour. So now I just see clients for 3 days a week, and then I do all my business development and everything else on the other 2 days a week, because it was easier for me to go, right, I'm in, kind of client mode today, and then I'm in business development mode. And I'm a lot better at it, actually. Now I recognize that I wasn't so good at it. So it's quite interesting, isn't it? And for me, when I look back at where does that come from, it comes from the childhood I had, and it being chaotic and disruptive, and, nothing was ever the same. And so I think it's really interesting how our stuff now, simple things like transitioning in your business space, comes right back to your childhood. And I know, that you mentioned to me, and you've mentioned just now about your father dying when you were 5 years old, wasn't it? But that you were responsible for a sort of a baby and another tiny sibling who was it 2 at the time?
Yeah, so I was 5 and my brother Dan would have been 3, but my brother Tommy was born just about 6 months after my dad died. So my mum was pregnant. So it was, it's very, very sad because, 6 children and my dad dies and my mum's pregnant with the 6th. But actually at the time, it was something to focus on.
Yes.
So I was going to her antenatal checkups with her, but I was really excited because a new baby is about to be born, and it's that's really exciting. And I was nearly 6 years old. In fact, I was 6 by the time he was born. So when he was born, people say, oh, it's really sad. I loved it.
Yes.
It was like a dolly that actually was sick and vomited and pooed its pants, right? Me and my brother Harry used to run the bath, get the clothes out. We used to put the clothes on the radiator to warm them up for the baby. I mean, it's so dangerous to think about what we were doing. Right? But my mum obviously had her hands full. She was obviously grieving. She had all these kids. So for us to be able to take the baby and just deal with the baby. And literally we knew how to do the milk. And at the time we used to have these awful terry toweling nappies.
I remember those.
You used to put a safety pin in. Can you imagine? I was 6 years old putting a safety pin in a newborn baby's nappy. We used to put these horrible plastic pants. Plastic pants to stop the wee coming out.
I remember those.
So, but the thing is that I took to that as if it was a doll. And I fed him and I did everything for the baby without even thinking it was a help or anything. And so I suppose I automatically, without thinking, it was totally unconscious, just took on responsibility.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, it is. And so presumably it was 6 of you. Where are you in the 6th?
Yeah, so I'm not a number, I'm a human being, but I actually am number 4.
Okay. I'm thinking because I have 5.
Yes.
So I'm thinking, where are you in the?
And where were you in the 5?
So I have five. I have five children.
You have five children,
but
right?
I'm an interesting. So I'm kind of one of six in that my mother had four children, but none of us are whole siblings. So we all have different fathers. And then my father went on and had two boys who are obviously also half brothers. So I don't have a whole sibling in the world. Not that I ever even think about it like that. As far as I'm concerned, they're all whole siblings.
Do you get on with them all?
Yes. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
That's good.
Definitely a couple of them are more challenging. I think we're quite chalk and cheese, but we do have we are brothers and sisters. And I have incredibly good relationship with my two brothers, with my stepmom and my father, which is interesting because I didn't grow up with them, so I would see them very regularly, but, I absolutely adore them and we have a lovely relationship. So I think it's really interesting when you look at the different personalities, but like you, I kind of look at mine and I hate the kind of, they've got middle child syndrome or they've got the oldest this and I can't really look at mine and think they fit in. I mean, I could squeeze them into some of those brackets. But yes, I just wondered, but it is interesting, isn't it? That link to that you like to be busy all the time. You like to be busy. You like to be on the go. You like to be doing things. And also interesting what you were saying about making that stock, that kind of motherliness that you had at 5, 6, you learned then. It's still very much there, isn't it? That kind of, I want to be the mother. That part of you is coming out, making that stock. And that busyness.
Making the stock. Yes, that's funny because that's really funny because I thought it'd be easy being a mum when I actually had my own kids. It was so different. I got the shock of my life. Yeah. I was not a relaxed parent at all. I found it really, really hard. I had my daughter when I was 33. And I already had, I was in the middle of my career. I was working at the BBC. I'd already worked in television. So I'd had quite a long time to live my life and work and do my career. You could call me a career girl. I wanted to be a career girl. I always wanted to have a career. I always wanted to work at the BBC. And again, I don't know why I always had this obsession. I have to work at the BBC. And I did get there in the end. But when I had my kids, when I had my daughter, I found it really, really stressful. And actually, I don't think I knew it at the time. I definitely had postnatal depression. I think it's mainly from lack of sleep. I just didn't realize. I didn't realize that if you're actually deprived of sleep, you go completely insane.
Oh gosh, yes, absolutely. I think sleep is the absolute key to everything. I always say to clients, go for sleep first. Sleep, then diet, then exercise.
I'm actually a sleep activist. And also when I was doing the breakfast show after I had my daughter. I remember we used to get sleep experts in at the BBC to interview them about, the sleep experts coming in today. Do you have any questions? And I would literally just pummel them with questions. What about this? What about that? And I found out some really great facts about sleep. I could almost be a sleep spokesperson now. But I didn't realize, it sounds really obvious now, but I think mainly that was the key thing to feeling so terrible when I was a mum.
I agree. I think it is. It's very difficult. I mean, my brothers actually, both of my brothers on my father's side, and one's had a baby about 3 weeks ago, and one's due to have one. Both first babies in about 2 weeks. Really, really close. And my brother's a doctor, but even as a child, he would be lying awake at kind of 1 o'clock in the morning. I was like, you're predisposed to be a doctor because they don't get any sleep. But actually having the baby, I know that he's just been like, gosh, this is exhausting. In fact, I think a day after he'd had the baby, he messaged me and went, how did you do this 5 times?
I mean, how did you do it? I mean, how did you do it even once?
You know what? My first daughter, she'll love me saying this. My first daughter, I mean, I was, a really young mum, as you know, I was just 17 when I had her. So my birthday's 10th of May. Hers is 23rd. And so I was very, very young mum. And she was a sleeper, from within a week coming out of hospital, she would sleep midnight till 6 a.m. She was a sleeper, very, very easy baby. And then when I had my son, who's just a couple of years younger, he was the shock. Because he was, not only did he touch everything, huge amounts of energy. In fact, just, diagnosed with ADD recently, huge amounts of energy, but a curiosity, always thinking, how do things work, or touched everything. But he wasn't a massive sleeper. And that was when the shock came with the second one, not the first. But I think,
that's interesting.
Thinking back to kind of how busy you were as a child, do you think you would have been that sort of personality anyway? I mean, you might not ever know the answer to this question. But do you think it was growing up in a busy household also just made you a kind of busy person?
I don't know. I think there is something to do with being child number 4. And I do think that I possibly was a little bit of an attention seeker. And, you know, I wanted to have my own identity. Also, I've got 2 brothers older and 2 brothers younger. So I was brought up with kind of lads.
Yeah.
You know, I was one of the lads. But, and when I think about some of the things, you know, I was quite often called bossy. And I know that when I was really young, I used to have a little sulky face. They used to call me Mookie face because I was this little sulky child. This is before my dad died. I've got no excuse at all. Right? So I'm thinking, what would I have become if I was this funny little sulky well, you know, I don't know. There's obviously, I think that is it nature or nurture? I would love to know the answer to that. I have no idea what would have happened if my dad hadn't died, because he also was he was an intellectual, and he didn't believe in things like television. Obviously, I was the complete opposite to me. You know, I'm completely into television and media and advertising and that sort of, you know, the corporate world.
Yes.
And he was a chemist, a chemistry lecturer. He was a professor.
Right.
He was also really deeply into self-discovery and being a success and working on yourself. And when he died, my mum kind of dropped that as a kind of one of our core values, if you like, because I think that was one of his really big, that was, you know, the priority for him, I think, was to have lots of children and teach them lots of things.
Interesting.
But I was so young, I never really, I didn't get any of that. So I always ask my mum, what about this? What about that? I definitely had a different upbringing compared to my older brothers and sisters, because they had my dad to kind of guide them. Yeah. You know, maybe when some of my sometimes the comments I hear from my brothers and sisters are, actually, if dad had stayed alive, you know, we would be so different, different, because he didn't approve of a lot of things. And I think he possibly was quite controlling. Yes. So I just didn't have the same. Yeah.
And you were given a lot of freedom though, weren't you, really? By him dying, effectively, like say, taking care of those younger siblings. It's possibly not something you would have done. So actually, you know, if you look at that, it breeds a huge amount of independence, a huge amount of freedom, a huge amount of kind of, let's try this, you know?
Yeah.
I was
completely free. And my mum did meet somebody else, another boyfriend, and we didn't really get on with him. But my mum was, you know, her belief, and I'm not going to blame her for it. I get on really well with my mum. She's 80. She's in her 80s now. We get on very, very well. However, she did make some really quite bad decisions in her life, and she had this boyfriend, and none of us got on with him. But as a result of that, we really were completely independent. We were free. I mean, you know, again, you look back and you think, or, you know, I used to cook. So I'd cook at home, and people go, oh, you're cooking. Oh, you poor thing. I think, what?
I think it's great.
Like, oh, your mum's gone out. I'd be like, great. Yeah. It's so brilliant when mum's not there. We used to do the washing, and we used to have a spinner rinse. We'd spinner rinse our clothes.
I remember that. Yes.
Them on the line. Everyone would just all muck in and cook and clean. But other kids would come around and go, why are we doing the spinner rinsing?
Yes. Yeah. I think it is fascinating. I have a 10-year gap between my older 3 and my younger 2. They're from 2 different marriages, and it is quite interesting. So when I had my older 3, we were very poor, and it was a question of kind of looking and saying, you know, does it need a first class stamp or a second class stamp? And the children really grew up with a really strong sense of money and value. You know, and actually I remember my eldest writing me a letter from uni, and she said it was only talking to her friends she realized how poor we'd been, and that she, you know, very much valued that I basically managed to kind of keep it so they hadn't really noticed. And my younger 2 children, my daughter, the kind of oldest daughter of the second set, as it were, is very money orientated. She understands it. She'll look for the bargains, all that sort of stuff. But my son has no concept of it at all. Now, he's not great at maths. But it's an interesting that even though she is great at money, those younger 2, I think, don't appreciate the value of money as much because, you know, I've been more well off. So they've, you know, we house swapped. So we used to travel abroad. That was something I, you know, never did with the older 3. And so I think even like you were saying about, you know, you had a very different experience to your older brothers. You know, I've got these 2 sets of kids who very much bond as a family, you know, very much so, but have very different experiences of me. One is me growing up in my 20s, trying to sort through all kind of my mental stuff. And the other is, me being much more sorted, throughout my kind of 30s and 40s. And I think it is fascinating, the differences in parents. And definitely, I can look back and say I made some big mistakes as a parent. And I think we do because we're growing up at the same time, especially for me, I was growing up at the same time.
It's fascinating though. So you had your first baby when you were 17?
Yeah. So I had three by 21. And then I had actually been with somebody for 8 years and we got divorced and I went to university at 23 with 3 children under the age of 6 and being a single parent.
So when you were at university, you'd already had a whole life.
Yeah, it was mad. And then obviously I met somebody else who didn't have children because obviously I was, quite young. And so we then went on to have 2 more as well. And I'm definitely a more worried parent, older. As a younger mum, I was not really worried about kind of life, the universe and everything. But I would definitely say I've been a more worried mum, maybe a more aware mum for the second 2. So it is fascinating. I think it is fascinating looking at where we are in families, but more kind of where we are because of what was going on, and yes, how busy is it? My middle son, who obviously an interesting one for him because he was the youngest child for 10 years and then became the middle child. So it's an interesting dynamic, but he was actually.
But how was he about that? Did he like it?
He did love the babies. Yes, he did. It was actually the kind of son above that was not so keen. But it was interesting. Yesterday, he was talking to my daughter. So he's now 27? I'm going to make a guess. 27. I've got too many of them. And my daughter, who's 17, was at home and they were chatting. And I said something about him, do you think you'll have children? And he said, I'm not sure because I feel like I already have, because effectively, he was 10 when the other 2 were born. But let me tell you, it's very different.
Yes,
exactly. I was like, you know nothing.
I can't believe when I became a mum, when I look back at looking after this little tiny baby, age 6, I literally didn't have any anxiety. I had no anxiety. And the difference between that and then as a 33-year-old, the anxiety, it was almost like somebody had given me a drug and said, right, you are now going to be anxious. You're gonna think your baby could die, it could choke at any moment. Your baby could choke. What is that?
Don't
anxiety?
have that awareness. That's funny.
I wasn't like that with my son though. My son was born 4 years later, and I remember having a chat with myself, and I said, I really didn't enjoy the first time round. I remember just being tired and just depressed and really not enjoying it. And I remember my mother-in-law ringing me up saying, I bet you can't decide what to dress her in. I remember thinking, what? She's going to have sick on it anyway. Yes, what does it matter what she wears? For God's sake, who cares what the baby's wearing? Yes. I remember thinking, God, I'm really not enjoying this. I'm really not enjoying it. So when my son was born, I had a chat with myself, and my chat with myself went something like this. The first time round, understandably, you want the baby to be perfect and right and healthy and warm and not choke and be safe. However, because you put the baby first, you didn't put yourself first. You messed yourself up. Seriously, like you really were so messed up. So this time, actually, the baby is coming last because the baby won't remember.
No.
The baby doesn't actually care about what it's sleeping on, what it's eating. It's not going to remember. So actually, when I put the baby, I didn't mean it, not in a horrible way.
I know what you mean.
But, he was down there, with the cat rather than me at the bottom of the rung of the ladder. Yeah. And I put myself first, and my sleeping became a priority. Somebody helping became a priority. It doesn't matter. It could be mum, could be my husband, Adam, just getting help was a priority. And actually I said, no, my priority the second time round is what will make me less stressed.
Yes. But in turn, actually, that is you putting your children first, because what you're doing is saying, if I go under, they go under. And it's important for me not to go to under. And I work with a lot of parents, and I definitely learned it myself the first time round, was if you give everything to your children, there is nothing left. But there's also a really poor role model. What are we modeling to both our mums and our dads? Work yourself into the ground, always put yourself last, and is that a model that we want to give our children? No, it's not. So then why are we doing it ourselves? Yes. And I remember finding that transition, once I became aware of that, finding that transition with the second set really hard to go from the mum who, yes, kind of put the bigger portions on the kids' plates, and of course I'll do that, to being the parent that said, no, I'm not going to, drive you into town, or I'm not going to do this, or and I think it's a kind of a circle for me. It's not putting them last. It's kind of saying we all need to fit within this circle. Yes. I need to be looked after. You need to be looked after. By you being looked after, I'll be looked after, and it just creates around. And I think, I often see parents who are completely burnt out because they are giving themselves nothing. No space, no time, nothing.
I mean, I don't know whether I don't know whether I've taught my kids whether this is good or bad, or whether it's negotiating skills. But when they ask me for stuff, I always think, well, no, the answer isn't always just yes.
Yeah.
So normally when they ask me, oh, Mum, can I buy this thing for my computer or whatever it is? My answer is, what's in it for me?
Clever.
when my son's now 11, so it's a bit, he doesn't really want to, do hugs and stuff anymore. But a few years ago, he used to go, 2 hugs, 3 hugs, 4 hugs. At one point, it got up to 75 hugs. I was like, no, that's unrealistic.
You've commercialized hugging.
I know, that's terrible. Hugs for biscuits.
That's hilarious.
But I think it's quite a good concept, though. Look, well, what's in it for me? Sell it to me.
I taught mine to negotiate. And in fact, just the other day I was clearing out boxes and I found an A4 sheet, and it was pros and cons of why I should have more computer time. And my youngest son had written it a few years ago, because I used to let him have like half an hour. I was so good pre-COVID, and he'd have half an hour on the computer and that was it. And it was literally, this is the column of pros, this is the column of cons, and, why I should have it. And to be honest, I read it and he convinced me and I doubled his time, and I always thought it was such a good skill. But I always remember one of the pros was, if you say yes, I will love you forever. It's brilliant.
Yes, but anyway, that is not true.
Sorry, I was going to say, I do want to come back to your heart attack, because what I found fascinating about the article, because I know this has been published already, what I found really interesting was that it wasn't a really obvious, what I would deem to be a really obvious heart attack. We all think, don't we, kind of clutching the chest, there's no doubt about it, I've had a heart attack. But that actually wasn't the case with you, was it? And of course, at a young age, why would you think it was?
I know. So you think when you have a heart attack, you get this elephant on your chest. Yeah. And you go, and then you fall down. Well, actually, I didn't have anything like that. I had, if anything, it was, a kitten on my chest, or, a slight feeling of, that's a bit, I can't quite breathe. It was really that subtle, right? It wasn't as bad as a period pain. It wasn't as bad as earache. It was just, that was a bit kind of, can't quite catch my breath. So that happened a few times and it was intermittent. So when something's intermittent, you don't think it's a heart attack. No. And here's a myth about heart attacks. It's not always just one. It's intermittent symptoms. So I had these and I had them for the first time at the airport on my way to Amsterdam. So I thought, I must be a bit of stress. Then I had it again on the way to New York, and I was going to speak at a conference. I was going to visit my brother. And again, it was Heathrow Airport, I think, or Gatwick Airport. And I remember thinking, am I allergic to something at the airport? Because I can't quite breathe again. This is really weird. Like, can't quite get the oxygen in. Anyway, I didn't think much of it. And I went to America, and I had a couple of intermittent symptoms, and they would range from not quite being able to breathe properly. So that's kind of almost, is it asthma? Am I having a panic attack? And I thought, I'm not really a panic attack person. I can't really imagine I am. But it definitely, and then it would be quite bad, and then it would go off again. I told my brother, and he said, you're smoking. And I remember my sister-in-law saying, do you want to come with me to a CrossFit class? A CrossFit, right? Have you ever heard of that? Yeah. It's like army boot camp. I'm like, what was I thinking? Of course, I didn't think that my symptoms were anything to do with a heart attack. So I say, yes, I'll come with you to a CrossFit class. So there I am with weights doing burpees in the gym. Like, burpees are basically up and down.
I can't do burpees.
I'm never doing a burpee ever again. Okay,
they're awful things.
If you haven't done a burpee before, don't bother.
Yeah, don't do them.
You're going up and down. And I'm all for keeping fit, and I do keep fit now, and I walk miles. But anyway, I was at this gym, and I literally thought, I'm going to vomit. I'm so dizzy. I can't breathe. Oh gosh. So I went out, I said, I'm just going to go outside. So I went and walked around outside and I thought, oh God, this isn't going away. And I suddenly felt I could feel it. Now it started feeling a bit like a panic attack. I thought, I really can't breathe properly now. Like, this is bad. And if I don't just stop for a second and just breathe slowly, I think I might lose control of my breath. And so I thought, well, I'll do my glossophobia exercises, my fear of public speaking exercises, although I hadn't written my book then. But I did know about if you get nervous and you're about to go on stage, and I was a nervous public speaker before, and I used to do these exercises, breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth. And I did that for a few moments and I managed to kind of get myself back to normal. So I went back in the gym and carried on. I didn't do the difficult exercises, but I just carried on doing the weights, just doing like the arm weights. I mean, what an idiot. So anyway, I said, oh, that was a bit worrying. You know, I really couldn't breathe for that class. I was just feeling I was so unfit. I thought, it's my smoking. I'm guilty. I'm unfit. So my brother said, look, should we go to hospital? I said, in America, you've got to be joking. So I said, no, I'll get my flight home. I promise you I will go to the doctor when I get home. So I got home, no problem on the plane or anything. But as I was walking back from the airport, I got the symptoms again. And I thought, shall I get a cab? I thought, no, I'll just go slower. So I was walking down the street. I mean, what an idiot. So I get home and I said, I better ring the doctor because this is getting quite frequent now. So I rang the doctor. The doctor literally said, have you got a history of heart disease in your family? Yes. Have you had pains in your chest? Well, yes, a bit. Have you been on a long haul flight to America? Yes. Get to A&E. And it wasn't until I was in A&E and they told me, yeah, we're not expecting these sorts of results. They didn't really say anything heavy. And I said, oh, I've got a meeting at 3. It was about 11 o'clock in the morning. I went, I've got some meetings this afternoon. There's one at 3 o'clock. Do you think I'll be out ready for that? And the cardiologist looked at me and went, I think you better cancel all your meetings today, maybe tomorrow. And it'll be much better if we could actually get you in as an inpatient.
Interesting.
I said, what? She said, you know, you'll be at the front of the queue then because we really want to get you an angiogram. And I said, what do you mean inpatient? Yeah, well, you know, we'll keep you in. I said, what, overnight? Are you joking? I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe that I had a problem.
Yeah.
And even now I feel I'm possibly in denial a little bit, but I just couldn't believe it. I thought, and then they actually said, you know, you're being treated for a heart attack.
Really? Gosh.
And I said, no. I'm not. I didn't have one. It was intermittent, but it was a mild heart attack, if there is such thing as a mild heart attack. But it wasn't one incident.
That's fascinating.
But the tip there, people, is if you have any symptoms or you feel dizzy or sick, it could be anything. It could be a stroke, even if it is a panic attack. Don't wait. Just go to A&E. Just go to A&E straight away, because I didn't do that.
Yes. God, that's incredible. Well, look, we are sort of coming up to time, and I want to give you a bit of time to talk about your business, because I'm, as I said, I'm sort of 3/4 of the way through your book, which I'm absolutely loving, which is called Goodbye Glossophobia, which is a term I didn't know before I saw your book. So tell us a bit about your work and why you wrote the book and sort of who it is that you help.
Well, I left the BBC to help people in business to speak with more impact and have more presence. And so within a couple of weeks, as I was coaching leaders and small groups of people asked me, oh, can you come and speak at our event? And I suddenly go, what do you mean me speak at your event? I help people speak. Yes, I'll help you speak at the event. Then they would say, oh no, can you speak? And I thought, oh no, I've got to speak. I've actually got to stand in front of them, And the first time I remember thinking, oh, how many people are there? And she said, oh, it's just the Women's Network. Oh, there's only about 40. I was like, 40 people. Now, even though I've worked in broadcasting and television, I've mainly been a producer. I've been very senior. I've run, production teams, but I've never been on camera being the talent or in the auditorium. That wasn't really my bag. I was the person coming up with the ideas and helping everyone else. So I really struggled with it. And what I found was quite a lot of women in business and women in leadership positions, men as well, but a lot of women. They probably came to me because I'm a woman, but I found that they really didn't like that sensation of speaking in public. They were really good at their job, clever, intelligent, creative, vivacious, charismatic, but all those people looking at me. And there's something about public speaking, glossophobia. Glosso is the ancient Greek word for tongue, so it's like the fear of speech.
Interesting.
There's something about glossophobia that's it's 75% of us feel that sensation of I might. Your brain literally says you are in danger, you could die.
Yes.
And that's how we feel, and and our body reacts as if it's you could die. You know. Anyway, so I was quite interested in this, and I thought, well, I do need to do it. If I do need to do it for my job, I need to be able to speak. And so that's why I wrote the book, because I thought, actually, I can help lots of people. After my heart attack as well, I had time, because I had to sit down and not move around for a bit. So I got my laptop and I started writing, and I absolutely loved it. I loved having some downtime. And I realized, wow, I wish I'd discovered I actually quite liked some downtime. I like downtime. I really like writing, because that's also feeding my, I wish I was doing something, feeding my itchy feet. But writing is a brilliant outlet. But I always thought, because I'm a bit of a slow reader and I'm semi-dyslexic, although I haven't actually had a formal, I haven't got a formal dyslexia certificate. But I always thought I couldn't. And I did have a business coach at the time, Kim Duke, who helped me. But so now my business is about helping people have more confidence, helping people to speak. But now in the we've got virtual world, real world. We all feel a bit uncomfortable in front of the camera. Even if you're really good in front of a camera, you still need help. And that's what I do. I help people to speak with more confidence. And the book has got, it's all about anxiety, as well as all the tips you need to create a successful speech. And I now speak all over the world, whether it's virtual or real. And I do go and speak at conferences, and I speak about communication and speaking. I also speak about getting promoted, speaking like a leader, about presence and gravitas. And I really, really enjoy it. But sometimes I do overexert myself.
I think it's a really fascinating thing. So I trained as a teacher originally because I wanted to teach, and then decided I didn't like it, but took a lot of that skill set, into the workplace. And like you, one of the things I have to do is go and talk about my work. And I was terrified the first few times I did it, absolutely terrified. I had, a handful of notes. I'd written everything onto the PowerPoint, and then obviously the more you know about your subject, you become more confident. The more you do it, the more feedback you get. So, now I'd say I'm kind of 75% okay most of the time. And I'm just at that point where I'm starting to ad lib and go a bit ad hoc and a bit off menu, as it were, and trusting in myself that I have that information. And I think that's a really big key for people, isn't it? Is to trust that they do actually know what they're talking about. But I remember going into, by being ironic, really, the one talk I went to, they decided to record and film. And they gave me a huge microphone to hold. And then also said, don't kind of go past the desk, and don't go past this thing on the floor because you might trip up. Well, people who see me speak, I'm a hand speaker. So I'm always demonstrative. I'm always doing this. I'm always moving my hands around, and I move around the room at the front as I'm talking, as I'm telling stories. And you know what? It was absolutely fascinating, because I had my clicker in one hand and this big microphone in the other, which of course I just had to hold here, so I couldn't move it. I was stilted and stuttered all the way through it because it just didn't let me flow. So my mind needs my hands to move, and it needs me to move. And it was the worst talk I'd ever given. I went blank. I think I needed loads of water. And it was just, I kind of felt like someone put me in a box and then go on, now give a speech. And your hands have to be here. And ever since then, I've said, if you want to mic me, you lapel mic me. And you let me move around.
It's funny. It's funny because when I've spoken at different events, I mean, there's always something that might just trip you up. There's always something, whether it's the microphone or the position of the room. Oh, the microphones just don't work. So you've actually got to project your voice today for 80 people. So, and every single thing that might go wrong, I've probably experienced it going wrong. And I know all the rules of thumb. So if there's more than 50 people, you definitely need a microphone. If you've got 80 people in the room, your voice without a microphone, it's really hard. So you either make it really short or cheat and get them to break out into smaller groups and give you a break, because you can't do an hour with 85 people in a massive room with no microphone, which I've tried a few times.
I think I've had 70 as a max with no mic, but it was quite a small room, so I think I was kind of lucky in that.
Yes, and then there's the holding of the mic, and then there's the mic that crackles, and then and the clicker. That's right. The clicker takes up your hands, so you've got the mic and the clicker. How do you work with that?
How do you move?
I think because I've worked in live television. And now I give myself permission. I think that's the big tip there. Now I just think whatever's thrown at me, I will work with it. Yeah. Because when it's live, you have to, the show must go on and you have to work with it. Yeah. However, before I was a confident speaker, something like holding a clicker would have completely tripped me up. Yeah. But now I know it's okay. It's okay to go with the flow. I love the words that you use. You used ad hoc, ad lib, and off menu. I love that. I go off menu.
Do you know?
Brilliant.
So I was asked to do a talk for, a women's sort of business meeting, and there were, I think it was 9 or 10 people there. And I just, it was on a Friday. I just had a crazy busy week and I just hadn't prepared at all. And in the end, I thought, driving into the car, I thought, come Mary, you know your stuff. And I thought, actually, I'm going to ask them what they want, which was something I'd never done. I'd always kind of stuck to my script. And I was just reading the bit that in your book yesterday about script, have a script if you really need it, but kind of try not to. And it reminded me of this event. And I thought, okay, I'm going to pick 3 things that I know I can talk about and are useful to this crowd. But apart from that, I'm going to ask them what they want. And so I went in and just had a flip chart and just said, right. And we went round everybody, which was lovely, small group, and just said, what do you want to get out of tonight? And I ended up actually just covering all of their topics. I went slightly over time because there was a couple more that they wanted me to go through, and I didn't actually have to have prepared at all. And I got the best reviews from that talk because, of course, people went away having answered the question they came with, rather than me saying, I think it's useful for you to know this. And that gave me a huge amount of confidence. So now I always have a talk, but I tried to get it shorter and shorter and shorter to allow for that kind of ad lib, ad hoc thing. I find being dyslexic, like you, not yet tested, but 2 of my children are. I find if people ask me questions in the middle of my talk, that throws me off. So I always say, no, leave it to the end, and then I'll answer it. But I think I think you talk better if you allow that flexibility. So I liked what you were saying in the book.
I love that story about you just turning up saying, what do you want to talk about? So most of my speeches and keynotes are partly ad lib, partly ad hoc, partly because I know, like you, that in that room at that time or on that Zoom, people have turned up and you don't know who's there and what they're going to be asking for. However, I always feel a bit guilty sometimes, and sometimes I feel as if I'm not professional enough, because when you're working with organizations that want you to give them the running order, the script, they want to know exactly, itemize everything, right? And I sometimes think, well, I'm going to wait until I hear what the audience says. But also it's quite dangerous leaving too much of the audience interaction, because if they're not very active, they don't come back with very interesting questions, you'll literally start with no content. So absolutely. What I've learned is a really good tip there is chunk up your content, as in, don't think about 6, sorry about that. But put your content in chunks. So you know that you've got this piece. So for example, I've got a whole piece on being yourself, how to be yourself, come up with your own hashtag. Or I've got my story about when I had to read a book at school when I was 6 years old, and I was asked to read aloud and I couldn't read. And that's in my book. And I literally just couldn't see the words. I couldn't get any words out. And it's happened to me as an adult a couple of times when the anxiety has just overtaken my fight, flight or freeze part of my brain. I'm sure you can explain exactly what's happened to my brain there. And I can't get the words out. That's happened a few times. But what I've realized is you can plan for flex. You need to plan for flex. So my style is conversational. It's not rigid scripts. Some people are really good with a script and they really like to learn it, and every second is thought through. However, danger.
Yeah.
If the audience don't really like that,
yes,
are you equipped to change and to edit yourself out if the audience aren't enjoying it? So for me, it's about it. I always have this how much to prepare.
Yes.
People say, can you over prepare? I think I'm over prepared.
Yes.
Well, if you're working in business and you're learning a script like an actor, I would suggest it's not a good use of your time.
No. And I agree. And I just also think that the unconscious is really good at tuning into the people around us and bringing up what's important. And sometimes we end up saying things we didn't even know we were going to say. And that's the most powerful thing in the room.
Yes, absolutely. So I like to think that there's a mixture of built content. You've got stories up your sleeve ready to go. You've got the running order, but there's room for people to ask and interact.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
We're coming up to time, and I have my kind of 3 key questions that I normally ask you. But before I go on to that, where do people find you? They want to read the book, which is fabulous. I fully recommend it. Or they want to find you. How do they do that?
Well, my book is on all reputable websites, bookshops and Amazon. It's called Goodbye Glossophobia, Banish Your Fear of Public Speaking. It's on special offer though on my website. So my website is estherstanhope.com. That's EstherStanhope.com, estherstanhope.com. I've also got an audio book that's on Audible, but again, I've got a special offer on my website. You can get 2-in-1 offer and money off. So go to the website for the book. And actually, if you can see on my website, I've got a blog, and my blog will take you to my YouTube channel, and you can figure out where to go from there. There's lots of links on my website, so that's the best place to go.
Okay, that's absolutely fabulous. Okay, so let me ask you my 3 questions. So thinking about, and it's interesting, it's been quite a lot of challenge in your life, really. But thinking about the challenges you've been through, are there any books, films, or music that have helped you through that?
I absolutely love films and books and music, but films is a love of my life. My husband's actually a film producer, and so I'm almost a co-producer. I feel like I am. I feel like I'm basically casting it for him. But so we do watch a lot of films as a family. So I love watching TV series, whether it's The Crown on Netflix or Big Little Lies with Reese Witherspoon and Nicole Kidman. I love things like that. I also just love old classics. Like, who doesn't like Gone with the Wind and Singing in the Rain and and Sound of Music? I love film. One of my favorite films at the moment is It's Complicated with Meryl Streep. But I just like films with funny or happy endings or mystery, murder mysteries. Even I just really love the craft and the craft of watching a film. So all films for me are a help, and I love the escapism.
Yes.
My favorite piece of music of all time is Debussy, Claire de Lune.
That's
and it keeps coming up in adverts and stuff. That's such a random. My brother played piano, and I always get him to play Debussy, Claire de Lune.
That's lovely.
When he plays the piano. And of course your book, my most recent book is your book, Mary. It Starts With You. Is that what it's called? It
begins with you.
It begins with you. It begins with you. I've literally read the whole book cover to cover and written notes in the notebook that you gave me.
Brilliant.
And I would recommend that for everyone, because it's it's easy but very compelling and great stories. And I've written loads of notes, but I'm not sure if I've quite figured it out yet.
Yes, it gets you thinking. I always think by the end of the book, the idea is that you get to the end and go, okay, I've got some stuff to go sort out.
And I've also recently read a book called Your Inner Critic is a Complete Jerk. And I think I chose that just because it had a really good cover.
That's brilliant. Oh, lovely. Well, thanks for recommending my book. That's very sweet. And likewise, I recommend yours. Okay, so my second question is, what's your takeaway tip for people today, whether it's to do with your challenge or work? I don't mind, but it's something you could literally just go and do right now.
My takeaway tip today is give yourself permission. don't hold yourself back. And just think to yourself, I only need to be 80% perfect. I'm just going to do it. So don't hold back, just do it. Life's too short not to.
That's lovely. That's great. And give me a tip for people who are kind of going, oh gosh, yes, I feel like that about public speaking. What would be a great tip for them too?
Okay, there's good news and bad news, okay? The good news is you can combat public speaking nerves, because I did. I literally used to be sick and I used to forget everything if I was standing on a stage, and I have overcome my fear. That's the good news. You can overcome your fear. This is the bad news though. Well, it's not bad news. It's just news. You just have to do it and do it again and do it again and do it again and again and again, every day, every week, as often as you can. You need to find a speaking gig, and it doesn't matter where it is, whether it's a school or a local community group at work, a meeting that you have to chair, but you need to seek out speaking gigs. And once you start doing it regularly, guess what? You don't even think about it.
I think that's great advice. And I'm the same. I totally froze on a talk, and actually now I really enjoyed them. I still get nervous before, but I really enjoy giving them, and I enjoy passing all the information I know is going to be useful. So I was talking to somebody yesterday, I think I mentioned, and I was saying, think of it, instead of that you want something from the audience, think of it as sprinkling glitter. You're sprinkling all of that information that you know and that they don't know, like glitter, and they're going to go away and really be like, wow, I didn't know this thing, and now I do. And I think that often takes the pressure off people if they think they're kind of trying to get something from the audience. But I think if you think about giving it, it makes it much easier. That's wonderful. And third one, if you were standing in front of the world leaders today, what would you say to them?
The first thing that came into my mind when you asked me that earlier was, I think that when we're kids and we're educated in school, we're all taught you've got to be good at maths and English, and you've got to pass your exams, and then you go to a really posh university, and then these clever people that rule you, that go to these special universities and are very clever, and they do maths and they can write and they read lots of books. They're the clever people, and they're quite analytical, and they're very, very intellectually powerful. And what I would like to say is, what about the people that aren't necessarily clever at maths and English and good at and intellectually powerful like that? But what about the ideas people? What about the people that are super creative and a bit woohoo, a bit out there, outside the box you said earlier? Why don't we really value those types of people, people that are much more the ideas people, people that are likely to think in a slightly different way, but maybe they're not so easy to teach because they're a bit woo. They want a bit of freedom. Their brains are popping and sparking in different directions. So I think we should actually introduce a whole new regime, which is, maths, English, and inventiveness. And inventiveness should become an educational must-have. Like, how inventive are you? Where do they ask that in job descriptions? Where do they ask that? So the trouble is, all when I work in big organizations, and if you go to look at the people leading leading the world, how inventive are they?
Yes.
Or they've been to a posh school because they're really good at maths and English. So actually, we kind of leave behind a whole section of craft.
Yeah.
But life is about the other stuff, right? So that's what I'd say. Let's create.
I think that's fantastic.
Inventiveness should be a third of what we're teaching people.
I think that's absolutely brilliant. I definitely have two children, which, looking back, I wish I'd sent them through a sort of Montessori route. But I have two children who specifically learn by being, quite like I do actually, hands-on, show me how to do it and I can do it. And don't learn by hearing things. They're both my dyslexics. They don't learn by hearing. Well, look, I think I could talk to you all afternoon.
Yes.
But we must bring it to an end. We've covered so many different things. Thank you so much for coming on my podcast. And I know that people who tune in are going to get so much from this. So again, just in case you missed it, estherstanhope.com, and I will put the details into the notes for the podcast as well. But thank you so much for coming and sharing your story.
Thank you so much. That was really great, really fun.
Great. Thanks so much then. Hi, I'm Mary Williams, as you know, and thank you so much for listening to the Alternative Leader podcast. I search for guests to bring you lessons and learnings that can help move you forward in your life, help you achieve the success that you want to, in whatever way that shows up for you, to help you lead powerfully, whether that's in your own life, as your parenting, your personal, or your professional, and make you the best that you can be. If you've enjoyed the show, please rate and review it, and please share it with as many people as you think also want to move forward and gain success in their lives. If you want to find out more about me, go over to my website, which is www.mari-williams.com. That's www.mari, which is MARI-williams.com, and you'll find links to all of my social media profiles there. There's also a Facebook community that you can join, and again, all the links will be on the website too. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic day, and thank you so much for listening.